Hey, this is Gavin Palmer with Hero Looking for Group. Let's listen to some more Paul VanderKlay.
As I say many times, now consciousness, I think of consciousness like a field. And this is a picture. I had a synodical deputy trip to Denver, and so I had a rental car and a few free hours. I usually try and buffer some space in if I can do a meetup or something like that. And so I didn't have a meetup, so I grabbed that car and buzzed out to Rocky Mountain National Park and had my camera and took a lot of pictures and had a fun time. And there were some elk in a field. And so here's one of the pictures that I took. Now, consciousness is like a field. It's just kind of out there. It's kind of a view. And it's monofocal in that it's a view. But now things come into that view and then consciousness sort of, focuses in and out. So if I show you this picture, you see the field and then you see the elk. And so monofocal's first tool to manage complexity is duality. And so, we see the feet, we see the field and the elk. And then when we look at the dormant grass, then we see the grass and the elk. I mean, we just keep doing these dualities because monofocality first manages plurality or complexity with duality because there's only two things. And it's sort of like task flipping back and forth and back and forth. We reduce the world into opposites in order to make it manageable. There's elk and not elk. There's grass and not grass. And it's very basic, but it seems to be the way we begin. Once you try to keep three things focused on three things at once, the system sort of hits its limit. And I think that's part of why three is so powerful. It's sort of beyond what we can manage in this conceptual frame.
All right, so watched some YouTube trying to be a good father. My son was interested in learning to play baseball. Found a professional who also has a son who's 5 or 6 years old, and he recommended these Swax balls that weigh as much as a baseball and they're soft. One of the there's different levels as you practice and get better. The first one is just, teaching them. Well, I don't need to go through it all. I could link to the video if you're interested. But eventually, they throw two balls. And I was doing this with my wife and with my son. And when the ball goes up, I could try moving my attention, or I can try paying attention to the area. Also, I'm reminded of jugglers. There are jugglers who can juggle many things. And some of that has to do with practicing. So you really learn how to do the right movement so that the location of it's like a dance, and you've rehearsed the movement such that everything is pretty predictable. But then there can be people who have developed these skills such that someone could randomly toss in another ball, right? And so you're able to do this juggling of your attention. So at three, I would say there's some people who are born with the personality, with the genes in the environment to learn how to juggle more than three things. And they have practiced doing it, and we can all practice doing it. So I just wanted to point that out because I don't think Paul is correct. And I think it would be good to be able to identify people who have practiced, juggling many things with their attention. I wanted to just point that out. Paul, I think you made a mistake here. You can reach a limit. And all of a sudden, for right now, for my son, he can do one. But if I hold two balls and I throw one at him and he catches it and he throws it back and I catch it, if I throw the other one, it bothers him because he's paying attention to one ball. And that's how we start off. Can you watch the ball, right? Then you need to be able to expand your attention into the second ball. And then if you're a juggler, you can do 3, 4, 5. You could throw in a chainsaw, right? So I think this is really important because it's a practice. It's a practice you can do in order to change yourself and to improve your ability to manage your attention, because your attention is the most valuable resource in the world. All right, let's go to the next part that I thought was important.
In individualism, the self is sacred. And that's when we get into all of this frame language. Again, when I was listening to Benjamin Boyce talk to James Lindsay about how, and I was thinking about the frame problem a lot then, I'd made a video about this. God is the frame of frames. Your frame is the one thing you don't deconstruct, because if you deconstruct your frame, very quickly you're without orientation and you dissolve. So you need a frame.
Yeah, I mean, frames are useful, right? But they're useful, and there's a lot of stuff here I like, and I'm focusing in on the things where I want to complement. I want to be complementary, right? So instead of saying but, I can say and. Frames are useful, and if you find yourself as a Nazi, Peterson would talk about, imagine yourself as a Nazi. And if you find yourself as a Nazi, it might be good to deconstruct your frame, right? Because your frame is going to limit you. It's going to limit your potential. It's going to limit your motivation and your potential. This is what Paul used these words when I asked him my questions. And so it is very useful to be able to remove the frame. And he talks about this as well, if I continue. So it is a good thing to be able to do it. So a frame is useful, but you also need to be able to remove it. And my path, my story, is the process of removing frames and trying out new frames. And this is the way you develop. He mentions that Jordan Peterson mentioned his granddaughter wanted to try on the frame of being Pocahontas. And then Paul VanderKlay says that eventually you kind of arrive at a identity or a frame that I'll use my words, it kind of becomes more sticky. It's a frame that you hold on to, and then he used some word that to describe it as that it would be a good thing, and that if you don't keep that frame, it can be difficult to interact and have relationships with others. All these are good things. The question would be, how are you being limited by your frame? And at least you don't have to change frames to ask the question and try to understand, how is it helping you and how is it hurting you? And it may be helping you that you're now able to have relationships or better relationships with people. Yes. And it may be hurting you because you're not perfecting yourself. So sometimes you end up in situations where you probably don't want to work with the people you're around. Sometimes. Let's go to this. I could continue. This was actually really good. I might accelerate it.
And the frame is almost by definition that which is sacred, because sacred is the thing you don't touch. Sacred is the thing that gives orientation around everything else. But one human being is a very shallow pond. And as we are seeing, one human being isn't necessarily one identity. And so when we have the indeterminate plural, such as if I'm driving a car and I just see a shadowy figure in the car in front of me and they cut me off, I use they, even though it's one person, instead of he or she, because I don't know the gender of the person. So I switch to the indeterminate. But I think part of what we're seeing is that there's an indeterminacy of identity. And so we're locating that as gender fluid, but it should probably be identity fluid. Now, there shouldn't be any stigma attached to this, because anyone who has passed through adolescence in the Western world knows that we try on a lot of identities. And in fact, Jordan Peterson, when commenting on his granddaughter who preferred to identify as Pocahontas, was trying on an identity. And so for much of our life, we try on identities, and we have different transformations. We see that, in fact, in the Apostle Paul, who had a rather important transformation that happens on the road to Damascus. So actually, individual identity that is singular is an achievement, and we call that integrity. And so when we watch individuals insist that they be spoken of as a plurality, this shouldn't really surprise us. And it's something we're going to have to figure out what to do with.
Integrity. Really. So the Nazi soldier, who is the frame and remains in the frame, has integrity. Be careful with that. Also, remember, we have bias. So we will see our frame, we will tend to see our frame as good. You have to really ask yourself, what are the costs and the benefits of the frame? What if my frame is wrong? And then ideally we have a process by which people can help us correct our frame, because we are infallible, we are not perfect. And how do we manage this situation? I really agreed with what Paul is talking about with being identity fluid. And I would encourage identifying with the Creator. So in the now, be with the Creator. And when you do that, you are no longer a he, him, his, or a she, her, hers. You are a them, they, theirs. All right, last part.
And I think part of the reason Jordan Peterson, the way he frames what an ideology is as opposed to a religion, it's not battle tested, it's not time tested, it's not community or sourced or oriented. There hasn't been enough wisdom in it. It's just really not going to last. That doesn't mean that it won't do a lot of damage. It doesn't mean that a lot of people won't be hurt. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that it's something we shouldn't be concerned about.
Yeah, I'm just now reminded that you have these religions that have different ages, and they go through periods of time that might be similar, right? There's a period of time where the religion wants to impose itself on others. At least I saw that in Christianity and Islam. I wouldn't be surprised if the Jews did that as well. So a ideology that has lived for a long period of time might be called a religion, and it has gone through the growing pains of making mistakes and learning from the mistakes across generations. That's one definition of a religion, is basically a very old ideology. The reason I wanted to stop here is because Jordan Peterson also says, my religion is how I act in the world. So ideology and beliefs, those are the things which limit your motivation and your potential. They provide the motivation and limit the potential. And so a long-lived religion might be that the risk or the cost of that religion is that it has a limited capacity, maybe due to motivation, in bringing about heaven on earth. And Paul earlier in this video talks about secularism and social engineering and the wanting of peace on earth now. And I think that is that's something to be very cautious about. It's something I have had to learn, is to be patient. The peace on the earth doesn't have to happen now. It doesn't have to happen in my lifetime. We just try our best, and it happens when it happens, and it doesn't have to happen now. And then by trying our best, identifying as us instead of I, or I think the Rastafarians would say I and I. So we identify with the Creator and work with other people who identify with the Creator, and we do social engineering guided by omniscient, loving Creator, Father, Mother, one, with many aspects. That's it. I appreciate your time and attention.